Welcome to this week's episode of Sojourner.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the introductory session, How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black-Biracial Men's Initiative. My name is Carol Jean Matthews-Shifflett, and I am the CEO of the Sojourner Group. I'd like to start by thanking my sponsors, the Utah Jazz, Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resource, PCAR, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, UCASA, and Inlighten Productions. Let me introduce Charles Odoms of Hartford, Connecticut. Charles has a master's in social work, is a counselor of men. He is also the founder of Black Heritage Film and Discussion. And next we have Al Davis from Washington, D.C. Al is a pianist, composer, and an IT business owner. And lastly, we have Jack Heslip. Jack is from Salt Lake City, Utah. Jack is a retired director of career and student employment services from Salt Lake Community College. Gentlemen, welcome. I'd like to ask all of you to start by giving a brief overview of your life, where you grew up, and what adults were in your home. Charles, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Carol. Hello, everybody. My name is Charles Odoms, and I hail from Hartford, Connecticut. I'm honored to be a part of this panel. My credentials are this. I have a special degree in drug and alcohol rehab counseling. I have a bachelor's in psychology, and I have an MSW, Master's of Social Work, specializing in group work and community organizing. I'm also the founder of Black Heritage Films and Discussions, and I did that. I did that because I see that a lot of us don't know our history, and if we don't know our history, we just don't know which direction to head in, because we don't know what's going on. So we need to know our history. A lot of African Americans don't know that. So my family, we're from Georgia. They're from Georgia. I was born in Hartford, here in Hartford, but I'm first generation, and I'm the third oldest of 7 children. So you know, a lot of my ideas of masculinity comes out of the Georgia tradition, where you treat ladies like ladies. You believe in the golden rule. You do unto others as they do unto you. So I've tried to live my life that way. But anyway, that is my idea of masculinity. So,
If that's all you want to say, yes.
All right.
And I need to let everybody know that we just started recording, so we are recording this webinar. Al, would you like to go next? Charles, are you done?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay. My name is Al Davis, and I born and raised in Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact, and went to school here, went to college here, bachelor's from George Washington University in biology. I come from a relatively large family. There were 10 children in our family. I am the 7th child of a 7th child, as a matter of fact. I'm a pianist, composer, and I'm also an IT professional. I formed a company about 20 years ago called Data Systems Group, and we do special architecture work and design. My upbringing was in the church, Pentecostal and AME church. I was raised with a very strict fundamentalist Christian background, so that informed my behavior when it came to women, almost like women were God, because there were mostly women in the church at the time, even though I came from a 2-family household. My father worked 2 jobs. He worked for the government. My mother was a homemaker. So it was seemingly very traditional. However, DC in the 60s, I started school in 1960, was a very segregated town, very segregated. So what I noticed when it came down to Black masculinity, the men that surrounded my community, even those who were not in church and those who were in church, took a particular pride in being responsible for their families, and being responsible for the women and the young ladies in their families, even though the community we grew up in, like Charles has suffered white flight at some point. we still had a core set of Black families and a core set of Black values, but they were informed by the church. And of course, my folks were from the South, like most Black people, it seems. They were from North and South Carolina, and they've been here since the 30s. And so it was a pretty old family. And so that's how my ideas of how to treat women and how to relate to women was formed, mostly from my father and from the church.
Okay, thank you. Jack, would you like to share with us?
Okay. Again, my name is Jack Heslop. My mother gave me the name Jackie, and I go by Jack. And born and raised here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And as many of you might know, Salt Lake City, Utah is not famous for its Black population. And so where I grew up, I have in my home, I am the fourth of 6 children. And I am the middle child. My mother and father are from Texas, settled here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so because the Black community here in Salt Lake City was not very large, we as a Black community were very concentrated in that where we interacted with each other was mostly through the church. And that's was the mainstay of my family. And then just to have negotiated the mostly white environment here in Salt Lake City, Utah, knowing that there's also a dominant religion here, that while I was growing up, it did not determine that Black men were actually men, because you could not hold the rite of passage in the Mormon church as a man. At age 16, you are able to hold a position in the Mormon church. Well, Blacks could not do that. I myself am Baptist. And then, so to be able to have to navigate that, and until like, I believe 78, when they decided that Black males could hold the priesthood, what they called the priesthood, which was what rite of passage to manhood. So this whole idea of masculinity in the Black community here in Salt Lake City, Utah, had to be one where had to be determined and developed by the Black community, because we were ostracized as far as males were concerned. So it was very interesting growing up here. I went to high school here, college in Oregon as an athlete, and you know, that's how I got my education. So this whole idea of masculinity, I think, is layered. I defined masculinity as something where you, as a male, you have to defend. So you have to be a defender in so many different ways, and a protector in so many different ways. And then, of course, a provider in so many different ways. But as Black males, this whole thing about masculinity takes on a lot of different meaning depending upon where you grew up, how you grew up, and the different experiences that you had.
Thank you, Jack. And I think that kind of goes to our next question. What did it mean to be a man in the environment that you grew up in and the household that you grew up in? Al, you want to, Jack, I think you just answered that question. Did you have more to add to that?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, you know, if I could, that whole thing about, or the question about, you know, how do you then negotiate that? You also have to realize that I think as growing up, as young men, the first thing we are taught is how to defend. How do you defend yourself? That is a very big part of masculinity. You know, you get called all kinds of names if you can't defend yourself, and it becomes a real issue. And so to be able to defend was a major thing as a youth here in Utah. And I think this whole thing about masculinity has to be looked at in the phases of life where you are, because you then have to be able to defend yourself to get to a certain point against a whole lot of different things. And then you have to be able to protect later on in life what is yours. And then, of course, to provide. And when I say what is yours, I mean what is your family, what is your accumulation that you've done, and so forth. So that finishes my part of that, Carol.
It's interesting because the whole thing about, about that you mentioned about defending basically yourself. Our expectations were set from what we saw. We saw our parents, we saw our dads. But when we got to a certain age, we really didn't know we were going to be attacked for attempting to be that person we saw. I heard as I got older, the stories. I have a story of my best friend when we were in college. He went to work, my father worked for Naval Research, and he went to work at Naval Research right at the college where my father was. And so all I knew about my father's work was that he went there to work and he came back. He also drove a cab. But my best friend came back one day from work. He said, man, he said, they got stories about your dad down there. He threatened to cut a white man about 15 years ago. And they have left him alone since. And it was the first time it occurred to me, even though I know my father, my father was born in 1914. It was the first time I visually recognized that people were still challenging this man. And I was probably going to get the same thing. Even though I was at the time just 22, I didn't know that I was going to get that same kind of behavior. And he had 10 kids. He wasn't going to let whoever this particular person was down there in Naval Research create problems for him taking care of his family.
Wow.
And so he did something that's most people don't know that we do, that Black men have always done, and that is defended us at risk. When I learned that, that made me very proud because he never mentioned it. And also it made me just a little apprehensive. I'm like, maybe I'm going to be facing some things. Because I thought everybody liked me. We grew up, everything thinks everybody likes us. Go to a white college and we find out differently. And then we decide how do we have to navigate that. So that was an interesting thing for me.
Thank you, Al. Thank you. Charles, would you like?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, hi, Al.
Hey,
I just realized who you were. Hey, man, had somebody talk about you like a dog.
Oh, my God.
But anyway, like I said, my father, they're from Georgia. I was the first generation from Georgia. So my father had a reputation of being a drinker and a fighter. So the reason why my family moved up north is because my father had beaten up these two sheriffs and they were looking for him. So he had to leave town. Then my mother, then my uncle went down and got my mother and brought him up. So I'm saying all that to say this, the idea of masculinity. I heard the stories about how the Black men always could do things better than the white guys.
Yeah.
And I heard all that kind of stuff. So growing up, they could shoot, hunt, fight, or do whatever. Even my buddies who went, when they went to the war, I never went to the army, but they'd come back and they say how the Black guys could soldier and the white guys just couldn't do it. So I knew that Black men took care of their families. I knew all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So my idea of masculinity comes from that. I just knew that what a man should be and do. And, as a matter of fact, like my father, like I said, he was a drinker, so he was in and out of our lives. And so and by the way, I'm the third oldest of 7 children. And so for some reason, when I was very young, I took on the responsibility of helping to take care of the family. So I would get these jobs, and I'd hustle, and I'd run errands, or whatever I did. I would always give my mother money to help out with the rest of us. So I knew what that meant to a certain degree, about what masculinity meant.
Does anybody remember though, the I can't quite remember. There's a certain point between either the 70s, 80s, and 90s when masculinity became associated with violence when it came to Black men, because it was never associated with violence the way we saw it, even though we knew that our dads were strong men and could do things. We never saw them as, I never saw any of the Black men in the community as violent men, even though most were blue collar, hardworking dudes, some were hard drinking dudes, but I never saw them as violent. But somewhere along the line, sometime between, I don't know, maybe some of the 80s through on, this association with masculinity and violence began to get like that. And that kind of troubled me.
You don't think that has been, since we've come to this country, that Black men have been associated with violence? You named a particular era. Did it change over time?
Well, that's what I seem to notice it, but that might be because it's a generational thing. But just growing up, through the 70s and well, I grew up in the 60s, as a matter of fact. I went to college in the early 70s, 73. Masculinity in Black men wasn't associated with violence, but sometime around maybe the crack epidemic or beyond that, Black masculinity, well, rap, I'm a musician, so I have to say, I think rap played a big part in associating Black masculinity with violence.
I think we have to be careful because a lot of how Black masculinity has been portrayed has come from a white perspective. And so when you had the defending of what was rightfully a Black man's property, whether or not it was their right to do whatever else, and they were not docile and did not submit to that, then there was a violent reaction. And so Black men, pugilistic, fighting inside of the ring, always this big physical something that was feared. And so I think we have to be careful about allowing the majority to define what we are and who we are. But if you look down through history, you'll see that when the slaves escaped, that they were thought to be violent. When they did not bow to master, they were beaten and so forth with violence. Right. And so that whole thing about Black male masculinity being associated with violence, I think grew out of a lot of the portrayals that white America put on Black America.
I see that.
Even through like the 70s, the 80s, but you had upsurges of that. Yeah. When the Black Panthers came in, they were supposed to be violent, but they were
not. Right.
No, they weren't.
They were not. That's exactly right.
And that happened with the Black Panthers, but there is an element in the hip hop generation. There is a violent strain in there, and with all the guns and all that stuff. And I saw that movie Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't wrap my brain around the fact that these guys, they didn't mind dying. They don't mind dying. From what I picked up from that movie and what I heard from these younger guys in my area, is that they don't mind. They go around shooting one another. So I don't know what that is, but it is violent, and they don't mind dying.
But I think I think in the whole of it, in the whole of the community, and maybe it depends on where you roll, the association with the association of Black people associating Black men with violence is an anomaly. I think, for example, I lived in a home over in Southeast Washington. Anybody knows anything about Southeast Washington? A lot of that is the depressed area. And I bought a home over there. And I was talking to a friend today who lives over there. I have never been afraid of Black people. You got the drug people, they're drug dealers over there. Yeah. And they're just, but I lived over there and raised my child there. I've never been afraid of them for any reason, because for the most part, Black people don't bother anybody. No. We don't have a violent streak in us. But we did have a tendency, and it's not a bad thing, I think, we have a reactionary streak. And I think what we saw in Straight Outta Compton, and what we see in some parts of the rap movement, like with NWA and the Ghetto Boys and groups like that, there's a reaction or I'll call it insurrection against the system that we had become acclimated to. And so it's not completely negative, but I guess it's the way to respond. I don't know. I'm here to learn.
But my thing was like violence to one another. I mean, I don't understand that. It's just it was just the movie itself. I just said, wow, I didn't come from that kind of that way of doing things, but wow.
Yeah. I didn't either.
But I agree with you, Al, in that I remember in my neighborhood when I grew up, people didn't lock their doors, and everyone, it was a neighborhood. And I attribute that to segregation and that we were all in the same neighborhood together.
Right.
So we all knew one another. So, it was just, it was one big happy family. That really was. It was like that the urban area and the tenement area that I grew up in. It was really no problem.
Stay tuned for the next episode on How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black-Biracial Men's Initiative.